Hey everyone, Angus here with Iron Bow Fly Shop. Today we're going to be tying up an Exasperator. This pattern was originally designed by Michael Bennett from Seattle for Pacific Northwest Steelhead. We're going to be tying this today on a Aqua Flies 27mm shank, and we're going to be using Uni 8/0 for our thread here. Trim off excess. I'm going to wrap this all the way back. Next we're going to be tying in our Intruder wire. This is Senyo standard in gray. You can use blue. That's entirely your choice. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to wrap this through the eye. And we want this to hang back about 1.25 inches. Get a couple tight wraps down. Make sure that's nice and tight. Come in here with a ruler just to make sure it's at 1.25 inches. Make sure that's super tight on there. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to fold these back under the eye. Doing so, just make sure that if you do get a cranker on, it's not going to pull that trailer hook out. So don't use good scissors for this. These are my material scissors, so they've seen the end of their day. Cover that up. Now we're going to tie in our lead eyes. These are double pupil in black, white, and black. And they're going to actually be tied on the bottom. A couple good figure eights in there. Make sure those eyes are straight and firmly secured. You can put a drop of super glue on. I don't think it's super necessary. Now we're going to wrap all the way back to the end of the shank here, and we're going to tie in some Flashabou. For this pattern, I'm going to use some holographic silver. So I'm going to pull out about 5 strands. We're going to double that over. We're not going to trim it to length just yet. Just trimming it so it's not all over the place as I'm tying this. Now we're going to come in here with our ice dub. Today we're going to be using it in Steelie blue. So we're going to create a dubbing loop, going to wrap that back. Use a fairly decent sized pinch as well. We want to keep those fibers fairly long. And as we're spinning this, we don't want to get it too tight and trap all those fibers underneath. So as I'm wrapping this, I don't want to go too far ahead on that shank. Make sure that's nice and tight on there. Trim off our excess. Push everything back, make sure it's nice and clean. Now, for this next step here, I've cut a 2-inch strip of rabbit for our next dubbing loop. I've always found it's important to pre-measure our cuts. That way you're not getting too much material onto that fly. So I'll throw that in my D-loop tweezer, create a dubbing loop. I like to make sure all those butt ends are nice and flush with my actual dubbing loop here. I want those fibers to stay relatively long. And that way you also have none of the butt ends showing. Coming with our dubbing brush. And I want to wrap this just behind our lead eyes. I want to leave a little bit of room for our next step here. Not crowd the eyes too much, because this next step here is going to get a little messy. Tie that off, make sure it's nice and secure. Trim off our excess again here. So for our next step here, we're going to be using some Bucktail. Today we're going to be using black. And for choosing the Bucktail fibers on this fly, I like to use the fibers closer to the bottom of the tail. Just makes them a little bit easier to stack. Bucktail is a little harder than deer hair to stack, or elk hair. Just takes a little more time. So I want these to actually extend about an inch from our tie-in point. Make sure that is good and secure. And then what we're going to do here is we're actually going to wrap around the bucktail. So we're going to want to separate it from the rabbit. So as this fly swims, you want that bucktail to extrude and make sure it pushes water and doesn't get matted down by that rabbit as well. This fly is extremely good at pushing water. So once you see those kind of flare out, we're good to trim off the excess. It's going to look a little messy. That's okay, it's going to get covered up. So we're going to tie in our next clump of bucktail on the back here. And we're going to do the same steps as we just did. Again, about an inch from our tie-in point. Get a couple really tight wraps in. We're going to separate that again here. It's probably the most difficult part of this fly. Trim off butts. Get a couple tight wraps in again here. Make sure everything's kind of covered up. Now we're going to tie in our rabbit strip. I've pre-measured this one as well. This is going to be 3¼ inches long from the point to the actual end of the fur, not on the hide. So we're going to tie that in just at the top of our lead eye here. Get a couple really tight wraps. And we're going to create another doubling loop here for our collar. For our collar, we're going to be using a 2-inch piece of rabbit as well. And I'm also going to fix my camera here. Found using a 2-inch piece didn't crowd the eyes too much. You're still able to wrap and figure 8 your eyes, cover everything up. And if you're struggling to keep that rabbit in the loop, Loon's low tack or high tack swax is also a good option. Come in here, insert our rabbit, and again I'm just going to make those butt ends nice and flush with our dubbing loop here. Try and not pull anything out. Give that a good spin. Make sure our D-loop is nice and tight. Now we're going to start figure eighting those eyes. Just going to adjust my light. Try not to let my D-loop slip out of my spinner. Just going to make sure that's nice and tight in there again. Give it a nice extra spin. Couple of good wraps to secure that onto the eye here. Trim off our excess. A couple finishing wraps down and we are good to whip finish here. Pull our material back, make sure we don't trap any of it. I'm going to try and do 2 on these guys. You'll also notice that our intruder wire can't even be seen. So if you're worried about pushing that wire through the eye of the hook, it gets covered up at the end here. So now that I've got our length here, we are good to trim our Flashabou. I want to trim it just shy of that 3 1/4 inch rabbit strip. And again, just for a little added durability, I'm going to come in here with some UV resin. Try not to spill any. Just clean that up a little bit. You're good to zap it. And we are done. Thanks again for watching. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop us a message at the shop, Instagram, or YouTube.